points in the 10-year. So there's a lot of sensitivity there. There's a lot of banks, but also non-bank financial institutions that are long duration, and we need asset prices to calm down. So we're not going to have a recession here, but we are in an asset price recession. The investable world is shrinking. You know, China potentially is not investable, and so everyone is going into fewer assets in the U.S. like tech or like high-quality credit. Everyone is long high-quality credit. You know, surprise, surprise, it has a very high duration, so we don't like it in this environment where there's a lot of treasury issuance and the long end of curves can steepen.
But there's this issue if you do see exactly the scenario that you're talking about, which is a surprisingly hawkish Federal Reserve. Wouldn't that be a huge support for the dollar, especially in this non-recession kind of period where people are consolidating their wagers on an area of dynamism and growth?
Look, the pain trade now is clearly, you know, markets going up and, you know, other currencies going up. But if we have a persistently hawkish central bank, and if the long end goes up, then the consequences for markets are pretty heavy. You know, we're having VIX at 14 now. Credit spreads in CDS in particular at record lows. So, you know, there's some pockets of value, but you want to really be careful about that move in the second half of the year where liquidity is going to contract. There's a lot of treasury issuance, ECB, QT, and then the BOJ exiting yield curve control.
How do you play, though, a pain trade?
So essentially, it's very important to be able to stay in the trade here. There are some longs that are very interesting with double-digit yields. So, you know, obviously rates are higher, but you can get 10% plus yields on credit in some niches of the market. Some of them are in Europe, which has been unloved.
Give us an example of that. Double-digit yield, where?
So, you know, talk about national champion banks in Greece or Italy. Greece is going to investment grade this year, post-elections. So there's very few countries that are going into the investable universe from being less investable. And Greece is one of them, from high yield to investment grade.
This is what you're doing. So, I mean, I can name the names. You're thinking about the Unicredits of this world, these big banks, national champion banks, Italy, across Europe. Is that what you've been doing?
It's more popular now, but obviously March and April, you know, there was a big opportunity to buy some of these, and so we're keeping them. And then also European high yield, you know, we're having a differential of around 6 months or maybe longer in the credit cycle between Europe and US. So defaults are going to rise, but they're going to, say, 3.5 to 4 in Europe. They're probably going to 5 in the US. Everyone is long high-quality credit. It's the easiest call. But spreads at 70 basis points on investment grade, they don't really pay you. So you need to barbell your portfolio. You need to have some bills if you want and have some high yield.
Has there ever been a time where you've been this positive on European banks? And I ask this because you flagged the joke that what's the first thing that an alien does when he lands on Earth? He destroys a European bank. So why is it that now you think this time is different?
So that's basically tells you that people normally are pretty bearish on Europe, and we had peak bearishness in March and in April. So that's where I got excited. Unfortunately, the window was very short. It wasn't a long-lived panic, but there's still value. And look, we do think something else will break between now and year end, so we're keeping some powder dry.
How much does China really factor into whether you're going to be willing to double down on your European bet?
So look, China is definitely been a drag on EMs. There's a lot of stressed credits in EMs, a lot of countries that have restructured, but unfortunately a lot of value traps there. In Europe, the Chinese, the foreign demand is weaker, but domestic spending is really high. There's no government, even in the periphery, that has talked about austerity, right, as far as I can remember. So that's very supportive.
Nice bond talk. How did Napoli do it? I mean, Napoli was not considered. How did Naples in Italy do so well this year?
I mean, Naples is always a contrarian trade, right? It took 20 years since Maradona, but...
okay, we call that Tottenham. But Tottenham has a new coach in the last 24 hours from Glasgow, right?
They do, from Celtic.
What are the best practices of Napoli? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah.
Napoli. What is the best practices in Napoli that the loser Tots can do? When was the last time the Tots won? Like 1850?
Oh, I can tell you.
Yeah. What is the best practice to make it a surprise next year where Tottenham does better than good?
I think they've been investing in players that were undervalued, and you know, it's definitely a team that has less less capacity, less spending capacity than others. But, you know, so shows you that
That's
the
not
underdog can
Tottenham,
make
is
it.
it?
They've got a history of picking up some fantastic players and then selling them on for huge sums of money. So this summer's going to be interesting to see whether they can hold on to those players. Really interesting man is Mr. De Laurentiis, who owns Napoli. Also, I think
guy.
in the family, family, they also own Bari, which is the city in Puglia, Tom, which is looking to get promoted this year to Serie A. So that family's having a great year.
Okay.
And a fantastic
It's exciting. I see all these changes, and frankly, it's Greek to me. I like the Greek investment grade idea. But the idea here of Tottenham having a new coach from Glasgow, is that right?
From Celtic.
From
yeah.
Celtic, it's pronounced.
Not
Right.
from Rangers.
What's
from
he going to do,
Celtic.
come in and raise hell?
They need to spend money and do something about that squad. I just get the feeling, Tom, that this is going to be a repeat of what we've seen before, time and time again with that club. We've got to leave it there. Alberto Gallo of Andromeda Capital Management. We need to talk about a golf, TK, PGA.
We did.
Live golf.
We'll do it next time.
I just cannot believe that some of these players took this moral stance against money from the Saudi government, only to find themselves on the PGA Tour with the Saudi government without any notice given to them whatsoever. And we're talking about players that have turned down hundreds of millions of dollars, TK,
They're all
to
going to
make
have
their
to be made
stance.
good. They're going to have to be made
We'll
good.
see. I'm going to be fascinated to see how this works out.
I mean, as I mentioned earlier, Brandon Quinn in The Athletic really captures the shock of it today. Greg Norman, who basically spearheaded it for LIV and for the Saudis, was completely left in the dark.
He didn't know either.
Yeah, so the theme that I'm getting after reading into this as a hack is simple. The PGA Tour is broke. That's the reality.
Just amazing how this deal came together. Apparently over Memorial Day weekend, a meeting in London. Just the whole thing.
In Venice.
And then Venice.
On a gondola.
The whole thing, I don't know about that bit. The whole thing just going under the radar. Liana Fix is going to join us shortly with the Council on Foreign Relations. Is that a gondola or a kayak?
They wanted me to stand up in it once.
Really? In a gondola? Really?
That little place where everybody meets us. Mrs. Keaton wanted a photo, and the guy said, "No, that's fine, sir. We don't want."
How's your stability on one of those things?
Next to nothing. Dramamine.
No, stay seated. Stay
With
seated.
an Aperol spritz.
I'm sure. A few of them. From New York City, equities unchanged. This is Bloomberg.
Keeping you up to date with the news from around the world with the first word, I'm Lisa Mateo. The global economy is set for a weak recovery, according to the OECD. The organization's latest economic outlook forecasts a 2.7% expansion of world output this year and 2.9% in 2024, both below the average in the 7 years before the pandemic. The OECD said the war in Ukraine, the shocks of COVID, persistent inflation, and the restrictive policies of major central banks are all weighing on the recovery. The caution follows a similar outlook from the World Bank. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is said to be planning a visit to China in the coming weeks for talks with top officials, possibly including President Xi Jinping. Now, the Blinken had planned to visit Beijing in February, but scrapped that trip after Washington identified what it said was a Chinese spy balloon crossing the U.S. And Citigroup CEO Jane Fraser visited Beijing this week. She's the latest Wall Street executive to travel to China, despite growing geopolitical tension with the U.S. Citi says Fraser met with the nation's top financial regulator, as well as deputy governor of China's central bank. Her visit followed similar recent trips by American business titans, including J.P. Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon and Tesla's Elon Musk. Global news powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Lisa Mateo, and this is Bloomberg.
The top names in climate change are on Bloomberg.
I want everybody committed to the kind of action that we need. We have a global emergency now. You know, we're still putting 162 million tons of man-made global warming pollution into the sky every day, using the sky as an open sewer. That's trapping as much extra heat as would be released by 600,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs exploding every day. That's what the scientists tell us, and the data shows it. That's crazy. That's why we have a third of Pakistan underwater. That's why we have the historic heat wave in China, nothing comparable to that ever. That's why the heat records are broken every year. And we're seeing an increase in the flows of climate refugees crossing international borders that are due to vastly expand unless we take action to solve the climate crisis.
Nobody covers climate change like Bloomberg, your global business authority. Welcome to the world of decentralized finance.
You can see the massive gains for the OG crypto coin.
The breakout we have all perhaps long awaited finally realized. We'll see if it sticks.
Bloomberg's covering all things crypto, the people.
There's no question this industry is composed of some bad actors and some good actors.
The transactions.
Volumes have surpassed $24 billion per day.
And the technology.
Stop talking about the technology. Start demonstrating the utility.
Bloomberg Crypto, Tuesdays.
From New York City.
From London, in Sydney.
From Washington.
In Tokyo.
9 a.m. in Beijing and Shanghai.
Good morning, everyone.
Have a great evening.
Here's what I'm watching.
You do not want to miss this story.
Is there the kind of upside?
I think that it's hard to put your head around any narrative. Let's just be honest. We've had sort of a shift in, are we in some sort of stagflation fears moment? People were talking about that all day yesterday.
I think there's going to be volatility ahead. We think we're at a unique time for markets now where there's been a tremendous amount of tightening injected into the system. And you're dealing with the period now where we expect to begin to see the economy slow, certain segments of the economy surprise to the downside. It's going to lead to ongoing volatility. We've experienced it in fixed income. We expect that volatility to work its way into equity markets. And it's going to create some challenges, but also opportunities for end investors.
Well, just absolutely fantastic to catch up with the PIMCO CIO, Dan Iverson. Doesn't often engage with the media, but when he does, Tom, you listen. And what was amazing yesterday about hearing a bond house, a fixed income shop, pour cold water over the equity market. You see that in the secular outlook, and it's something we brought up with them a few times yesterday.
And we've got to remember 12 months, 18 months back, they had a massive house call of caution about bonds. And I can guess it of the major houses, price down, yield up. PIMCO nailed that better than anyone. So what's their call now on a simplistic basis?
Far more enthusiastic on credit right now, especially relative to the opportunities in equity. That's the pitch. That's going to be the pitch from PIMCO for the rest of the year, I imagine.
I'll have to see. I mean, we're going to talk much more about this. John's visit to PIMCO, very productive yesterday, including with Richard Clarida. I hope he's with us for the Fed show. It's going to be fascinating to see June.
For the skip.
I think it's 16th.
The hop, the jump.
Skip, whatever it's going to be. Red and green on the screen right now. John, the VIX 14.12 speaks volumes, doesn't it?
Yeah, the fact that it's so low. The fact that it's so low and equities are so resilient, the rally we've seen so far here today. If you are just tuning into the program, equities just about turning positive in the last 30 minutes or so. Equities up on the S&P 500, just a touch of green there, and yields a little bit higher by a couple of basis points. Feels very calm this morning, Tom, but I think away from the index, it's been amazing to see this market this year. The churn beneath the surface, the rip you've seen in the likes of Nvidia, Meta, AMD, even Amazon, Apple, take your pick, Tesla. Just rip-roaring rallies.
My summary is still in the back end of the pandemic, the Biden stimulus and all the disruptions that we've seen there. Speaking of disruptions, there was one yesterday with the horrific images that we see from a war in Ukraine. We are briefed now by Liana Fix, fellow for Europe at the Council on Foreign Relations. She's been exceptionally good about the continental Europe view of this war. Liana, it's a war. We forget that. Are dams supposed to be blown up in a war?
No, they're most definitely not supposed to be blown up. In fact, it does constitute a war crime to blow up a dam and to use infrastructure in this way, which obviously is used as a means of warfare to change the situation on the ground, but most importantly, affects the civilian population in an incredible way. It is an ecological and humanitarian disaster, and it is something that Ukraine has warned against for months and months.
I assume there will be war crime processes that will go out in years and years. What do the allies, what does NATO, what does President Biden do today, given the breaching of this dam?
So the United States has announced that they are planning to declassify intelligence, which will point to Russia as the perpetrator of this dam collapse, and allies of Ukraine and allies of the United States have all come together in condemning this attack and basically siding with Ukraine in this catastrophe. It is very clear that the majority thinks this is something where Russia is behind.
Liana, is this a major escalation that will change the course of this war?
It is an escalation in terms of how brutal civilian infrastructure is used for warfare means. But the most important question is certainly what is the effect on Ukraine's counteroffensive and what will it mean for the course of the war? And here we have to say it will have an effect on the counteroffensive. It will certainly buy Russia time. It will slow Ukraine down. But it is not something which comes entirely unexpected for the Ukrainian side. It means that they will probably have to shift their counteroffensive east instead of west. But it is certainly something that in their planning for the counteroffensive, they may have taken into account that Russia can do the step and that the dam may collapse.
Investors and strategists who are waking up right now, who work in the world of money, have really moved on. I don't read that much about the Ukraine war as sort of a tail risk in any material way at the same time that you see these potential escalations. How are you viewing the potential risks at a time when a lot of people are just hoping for some sort of solution, but not seeing anyone anywhere on the horizon?
Yeah, it feels very much like a waiting period, like waiting for Godot, waiting for how the war continues at this moment, because the tension really has built up over the last months about what will happen next. And I think the next step is definitely the Ukrainian counteroffensive, which will continue and which is likely to offer some successes. Right. And then this counteroffensive, and the hope is that this counteroffensive translates military leverage into diplomatic leverage for Ukraine to get Russia to the negotiation table on terms which are, to some extent at least, acceptable for Ukraine.
Not to make light of it, Dr. Fix, but very simply here, can Ukraine directly retaliate for the blowing up of this dam?
No, Ukraine cannot. I mean, this dam has been mined already last year. It has been under Russian control since Russia occupied this territory. What Ukraine has done is, since Russia started these unprecedented attacks on Kiev almost daily, what Ukraine has done is to send its own drones to Moscow to divert, to bring basically terror to the Russian homeland. But it does not have the means to respond on the scale that Russia usually responds. So what we might see is, in reaction, some further small incursions into Russia, drones reaching Russian cities, but certainly not something of that scope.
Incredibly controversial over the last couple of days. Liana Fix there of the Council on Foreign Relations on the war between Russia and Ukraine. A couple of programming notes for a little bit later this morning. Stan Druckenmiller coming up a little bit later. We're going to take some of that on Bloomberg TV at about 9:20 Eastern time. Look out for that. TK, what an investing legend. We're talking about 30% returns over 3 decades in his fund. Just phenomenal performance for a long, long time.
He's never gotten the credit for this. I've actually had the privilege of talking to Mr. Soros about it. And this is many years ago when Mr. Soros was much more healthy than he is now. He's pretty fragile. But Druckenmiller was what he was. He was way out front with strategic and tactical trades, and he just continues to do that year after. He's had some challenges along the way. He's been very good about his challenges. One thing I love about Stan Druckenmiller is when he gets it wrong, he's like the first one out to say, oops, that didn't really work.
I agree with you on the credit issue, though. Why is it we always give all the credit for that big sterling call in the early 90s to Soros?
No, there's the media.
When it was Druckenmiller that basically came up with the trade.
Yeah, I mean that's what it was. I mean, Brian Moynihan joining us today, and
very cool.
I will say this forever for the banker's banker. I remember the conversation we did in Davos with him, the detail.
Yeah.
He knew like the tellers' names in Cincinnati, I think. But Moynihan had to pick up the pieces from Ken Lewis. And we forget about how these people got to where they got, including Stan Druckenmiller.
That Bloomberg Invest conference starting a little bit later this morning. Of course, we'll have full coverage for you over the next couple of days. Lisa, AI is going to be a part of that conversation with Druckenmiller. We're not going to do that global macro stuff and just sit on the Fed, fixed income and the economy. AI is going to be a feature of that chat.
That's exactly what I was going to say. We're going to be talking more about specific sectors, specific names, active management, and less about macro bets where people are saying the Fed is kind of not full front and focused in the same kind of way that it has been for the past couple of decades. So what do investors that have their training in macro do? How much do they sort of go back to the single name and single sector in AI type of enthusiasm?
Well, they can identify a big momentum trade that they want to hold on to. TK. That's for sure.
I'm just thinking of the percentage of people, let me get closer to the mic.
Please do.
The percentage of people who feel behind.
You think?
Going into June.
Growing as the year grows older.
Can you imagine
as the rally continues to build? I know.
You're 800 basis points behind the market.
Andrew Sliman of Morgan Stanley said it. Yeah. He talked to the team here at Bloomberg. He said by the time you get to fall, you're looking around, you were talking up 5% cash and the market's ripped double digits. You've got a problem on your hands, haven't you?
I think you got a huge buy side, sell side, all of it. You got a huge, huge problem.
Troy Gayeski of FS Investments is going to join us shortly. Looking forward to that chat as well. Just to sum up the price action for you this Wednesday morning. Good morning to you all out there. Your equity market on the S&P 500, just about positive in the last 30 minutes or so. Keep saying no drama. Really no drama at the moment at the benchmark level on the S&P 500. Elsewhere, yields bleed a little bit higher, up 2 basis points, 368.52. 1 week away from the Federal Reserve. If you're wondering where the Fed speak is this week, there's no Fed speak this week because we are in the quiet period. The quiet period. We've got tons of T-bills coming to market. Tons, hundreds and hundreds of billions over the next several months. We can chat with Troy about that. From New York City this morning, your market looks a little something like this. The equity market just slightly positive, and we're all hoping in New York we see the sun today. We see the sun, and maybe we can even breathe, Bramo. That would be nice, wouldn't it?
Dream big. The sun, and hopefully it's not just a glowing ball of orange. Let's just put it that way.
Big dreams.
From the world of politics to the world of business. Every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, hosts Anne-Marie Hordern and Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lines deliver news, insight, and analysis live from Bloomberg's Washington headquarters. Get the latest from and about politics' biggest power players at the end of every trading day. Balance of Power, every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, only on Bloomberg, your global business authority.
I'm going to name a couple of your babies. I don't know if I'm asking you to choose amongst your children, but you know, some of the most recognizable buildings by you, of course, the Millennium Bridge, London City Hall, the Reichstag, and the Great Court British Museum. What was your favorite project?